Welcome to the Evo India podcast. And today in our podcast studio, we have a special guest with us, Narayan. He's the CEO and head of design at Ultraviolette. Ultraviolette is this cool electric motorcycle startup. I'm sure everybody has heard of Ultraviolette. In fact, you've been in the news recently with the inauguration of your new brand showroom in Bangalore, which looks really cool. So, Narayan, welcome to the Evo India podcast.
My pleasure being here, Sirish.
So, in this podcast, we're going to talk about the entire journey of Ultraviolette, where it started from, your ideas. Why did you think of a EV motorcycle and not an ICE motorcycle? Why did you think of a EV motorcycle and not a scooter?
Sure.
Because everybody's talking about scooters. What do you think of the whole EV space? Your challenges, what happened during COVID, the disruptions that you plan to, or at least you want to deploy. The whole journey, racing. Now,
Sure.
that's something that we are really excited by. A single make electric motorcycle racing series. So there's a lot that we can talk about in this podcast. So, Narayan, let's dive right into it.
Absolutely.
Where did this whole journey start from? Ultraviolette.
Right.
What does that mean? What's the thought behind the name?
So, we need to go back in time to establish context to Ultraviolette forming eventually. So, my co-founder Neeraj and me go back a long way. We've known each other since we were, I think, in grade 5.
In Bangalore?
In Bangalore. Went to the same school, same
school?
class.
Which school?
Frank Anthony.
Okay.
And classmates competing for top rank during our time in school, right? So highly competitive, but also friends because we shared a lot of intellectual passions towards technology and science. And so that's how our relationship started. And we went to the same engineering university as well in Bangalore. And I had taken up...
Which university?
This was BMS.
Okay.
And I was studying mechanical and Neeraj was in computer science and creative integration of engineering and technology, electronics, robotics was a common passion for us by this point. So what happened during those 4 years of college was we started taking part in a lot of these creative engineering competitions, which led us to go beyond the textbook and integrate different forms of technology to solve problems. So I'm sure you're aware of Tech Fest at IIT Mumbai.
Yes.
Right. So similarly, IIT Chennai had something called Shastra. So all of these colleges had really cool annual tech festivals, which had crazy problem statements. Like we've built submarines, we've built hydroplanes, we've built drones, helicopters, automobiles, of course, self-balancing vehicles, whatnot, to sort of meet the problem statement for that the marquee event in these competitions. And we over time ended up winning about 40 of these through 4 years of engineering. And I think back then we were doing it just straight out of passion and interest and an avenue to, let out our creative thoughts. But we never thought it would get structured in the way and form that it is today at Ultraviolette. So I think that formed the core DNA of how we work together, how we bring together different creative implementations of technology to solve interesting problems.
So out of college, that's when you started Ultraviolette, or both went separate paths, started working somewhere else and then came back together?
I think we spent about close to a decade working and studying in different parts of the world. So post-engineering, I think that's when I really understood what I want to be doing. So I joined one of the IT companies who promised me that I would be working on projects with Ferrari, Boeing, etc. But 2 months into my job, I was still doing C++ coding. So fortunately, that 2 months told me what I do not want to do and forced me to sort of research where my skills could be utilized best. And that's when I figured NID at Ahmedabad was one of the good schools in India for creative education and joined the program for transportation design. And it was a 2-year course. Worked in a couple of companies as well during that stint, and was about to join the industry, at which point I also for some reason thought I need some more global exposure. Applied to a few universities abroad, joined Umeå in Sweden, very differentiated program. They've got an intake of about 8 or 10 people per year, with 7-8 different nationalities. So imagine the kind of cross-cultural learning that comes into play here. So it was me from India, classmate from China, Korea, Japan, Norway, Germany, Sweden. This was the mix. And all of us were working on the same project brief, but the way each person approached it was fundamentally different based on all our cultural bearings and.
What was your project brief?
So we had multiple projects. I think one was a project sponsored by Volvo Trucks, which was to design a future adaptation of what Volvo Trucks could be like 10 years down the line. So my concept there was, this won an award also at the Move Awards in Europe. My concept was to design a tow truck because the idea was traffic jams in India, and if you have an accident on a highway, then you have like a multi-kilometer jam behind, right? So then I was thinking of a spider architecture where the tow truck has robotics that can enable it to change volume in X, Y, and Z axis. It moves over the other vehicles, reaches the problem area, picks up the vehicle and goes away.
Okay.
So this was something very offbeat, very interesting. I think got a fair bit of recognition while I was there as well. So, but while the brief is the same, different people had different ideas to solving such problems. And I think what I sort of gained the most was an open-minded perspective, right? Where you're not always thinking that my idea is the best form of solving a problem, but you're open and being receptive to saying how it could be, structured better.
So after university in Sweden, then what? What was the next step for you?
So I spent some time at Osaka, worked at Daihatsu, working on K-car concepts. So handled an entire concept car development while at Osaka. This was 2013. 2014, I moved to Wolfsburg, worked at Volkswagen for some time.
Okay.
Worked on some of the Volkswagen lineup of pickup trucks and cars as well.
The Amarok.
Yes.
Okay.
One of the projects was the Amarok. So towards the end of 2014 is when, Neeraj and I had been in touch throughout. He, in the meantime, was working at Yahoo, quit his job at Yahoo, started a startup to do with drone technology, and then I think put that on hold. Studied his MBA at AIM in Manila, and had just come back to India also. Right, so we were bouncing off ideas, and it seemed like a good time to come together to work on something in the mobility space. But we were also clear that electric is the way forward. Because by then what had happened was, Tesla wasn't the first EV, but Tesla made EV desirable through performance, through design, right? Two important aspects that in some ways and forms were overlooked by the previous attempts at electric vehicles. So along with this, the price of lithium-ion batteries from $1,000 per kilowatt hour had come down to the 300s, 400s. And we could see the trajectory headed towards break point in 2020, where we could come close to price parity, provided you choose the right segment. So that's all of that came into play with us deciding to work on electric mobility.
This was when? What year?
2015.
Okay. And that's when you set up Ultraviolette?
No, so 2015 is when we gave ourselves about 12 to 18 months to figure out what to do in the space of EVs, right? So, of course, now you see Ultraviolette as a high-performance motorcycle is our first product, but we had a lot of logic going into that as well. We spent time in the US, understood the sentiments from Tesla consumers, understood the technology and the sort of development cycles and time that went into creating that technology from scratch. Spent time in Taiwan. I think that's when Gogoro had launched as well.
Okay.
And that was an example of a different business model altogether, where you run batteries as a business and you sell the vehicles, and a more complex ecosystem on that front. So understood a lot of what was happening around the world, and having grown in India, of course we understand the passion for motorcycles. I've owned 6 bikes in the past. Neeraj, I think, has owned 4 bikes in the past.
Okay, so what 6 bikes have you owned?
Okay, so
let's gauge your enthusiast factor.
Okay, so when I was in class 9, my dad thought he would buy a bike because I was 15, 16. And then he thought he would use it for 2 years and then give it to me when I joined college, right? And that's when the CBZ had launched. Okay. I was crazy about the silver color.
Of course,
CBZ, right? And if you ask me, that sort of, after the series of RX and the Shoguns, CBZ was the first serious attempt towards performance motorcycling.
So the CBZ, going back to my years, the CBZ was, I think, a year or 6 months before I started off in automotive journalism. And that's was the first time I read the word orgasmic in print because Adil used the word orgasmic to describe the CBZ.
Right.
So it made 8-year-olds out of grown men.
Absolutely.
So the CBZ. So that's a tick on the enthusiast.
No, CBZ didn't come home, right? Story is different. So
Okay.
I was pushing for the CBZ. So we went to the dealership. So I was trying my best to convince Dad, and then, I mean, he was halfway there, and then he asked the question, what is the mileage?
Okay.
On one side, you have Splendor with about 85 kilometers and CBZ with 45 kilometers. So
the Splendor came home.
Yes. So Splendor came home, but nevertheless, super excited because the prospect of having your own first motorcycle is beyond anything else. So somewhere down the line, once I started using the bike, that's when Mission Impossible 2 came in, right? And you saw Tom Cruise and there were 2 Triumph motorcycles in that film, and that's the first time I saw the dual headlights on a bike. So Splendor got chopped, matte black paint on all the body panels.
So a hero speed triple.
Yeah. It looked weirdly cool.
Okay.
Sort of chopped off the tail section of the seat and had some makeshift.
So you were always hands-on, right from the beginning. You were hands-on, and you were into design.
Yeah. I mean, I was always hands-on from the point of view. I didn't worry about the final result. Like, even if it comes to 70-80% of what we want, that's still attempt worth making, right?
Yes.
So did that, and then once I joined design school. So 4 years of engineering was on the Splendor. Joined design school, and I'd saved up some money from the competitions that I'd won. So the R15.
Okay. So that's a definite tick on the enthusiast radar.
Yeah. That's when I think 2008-9 is when the FZ and the R15 had launched. And both were great motorcycles.
Yeah, definitely. The R15 was the first motorcycle I got my knee down on. So 100%,
Yeah. So that was very exciting, and I still remember the police in Ahmedabad didn't care about the number plate or the registration. They would stop me and ask about the bike. How is it? What does it feel like? So that was the second bike. Somewhere in between, I got hold of a friend's Shogun as well.
Okay, the boss.
Yeah, wanted one 2-stroke in the family.
Yeah. And
then past Shogun, I think when I came back to India in 2015, got a friend's Duke 200.
Okay.
He was moving abroad, and he sold me his bike. And through my entire career, I've been a super big Ducati fan. I mean, not just my career, as a kid. And somehow got hold of 899 Panigale.
Sweet.
And I was really particular about that and not the 959 because of the underbelly exhaust.
Oh, sweet.
And I think they stopped production of the 899 in 2015, right? So, yeah. And of course, now it's the F77s every day.
Of course. So that clearly establishes that you are a biker.
Yeah.
You are a bike/car guy at heart, and that's why you are in this business.
Absolutely. That's why we chose mobility. I mean, with both of us, the passion is that, right? Creative forms of mobility. If you look at the projects in engineering times as well, that was the common baseline. Neeraj had owned the Pulsar. He first picked up the 180 when it launched. That was one mad bike.
Yeah, for its time, it really set the benchmarks. And of course, the CBZ was there, but it was the Pulsar that gave regular folk like you and me our first taste of proper motorcycling. My first motorcycle that I bought with my own money was a Pulsar.
Right.
So we are all been there.
Right.
And that's where it starts off, and that lights the fires, or you have the passion inside you, and that just gives it the fuel, right?
Right.
So you said about starting off doing your research in America, understanding how the Tesla ecosystem works. The obvious question that I think a lot of people on watching this also would want to know is that how did you sustain yourself? Like you need money for all of this, right?
True.
You're not working, you're doing research. So how does that initial startup phase work?
See, it required a lot of family support because both of us come from, say, middle class families. Both our families are doctors. And incidentally, none of us kids got into medicine. So they were really supportive, Neeraj's family or my family, in terms of being confident that if they want to try something, it's okay to spend a couple of years, give it a shot. What is the worst case scenario that you go back to the industry, right? So From that perspective, I think that gave us a lot of mental support. And in terms of money, we saved up some money while working. I was in Japan and Europe.
Yeah.
Neeraj was shuttling between US and India. I think we saved some money that we spent in the first 1 year of experimenting with multiple things.
And how long were you doing this experimental phase?
About 15 months.
Okay. And that's when you finally decided that you're going to go the two-wheeler route?
Yes. And we looked at different segments, four-wheelers, two-wheelers. Within two-wheelers, of course, there's mass mobility.
Yeah.
There is performance motorcycling. Then, of course, there is leader class equivalent of vehicles as well. When you break it down, four-wheelers, we felt it's too long of a gestation period for a startup to take it up and go the whole way without guaranteed resources coming in, right? Because engineering from scratch, a two-wheeler would take 4 to 6 years, depending on how much focus you want to give on what part of the tech. Four-wheelers is definitely 2x of that timeline. And of course, there's always the romance of motorcycles that was somewhere in the back of our minds. And when it came to two-wheelers, we look at mass mobility. And I think at that point, our logic was mass mobility always comes down to price points at some point in time. Today, if you look at the IC engine scooters for that matter, more or less the performance is established across the board. You have multiple, maybe 15, 20 different options across the manufacturers. And price point plays a very big role in decision making. And of course, your Activa has taken over that market, right? The brand is too strong.
Exactly, yep.
And what we also kept in mind was the larger manufacturers are likely to enter the market with that segment because the gestation period is lower. Commodity tech is available in some ways and forms.
And which is what you see today, Bajaj, TVS, everybody is the hero.
Right. So we didn't want to get into that fray where once you start only competing on price point, innovation starts taking a backseat. So I think that was a fundamental reason we did not look at like a typical mass product at that point. Two was, I think we've established fairly clearly, we find challenges quite exciting and we wanted to solve for higher degrees of challenges and motorcycles made a lot of sense with that line of thought.
So compared to an e-scooter, what are the additional challenges in an e-motorcycle?
I think one fundamental point is our platforms today are between the F77, F99, we're outputting between 30 to 60 kilowatts of power, right? A scooter today is probably doing 5 to 7 kilowatts. And now when you look at the losses or the heat, it is a square factor of the current.
Okay.
So your current goes up 8 times or 10 times. Your heat and other losses go up 60 to 100 times. So cooling technology, for instance, what worked for a 5 kilowatt output, it can't scale linearly for a 50 kilowatt output, right? So the most important challenges to solve are on maintaining consistency, safety at that performance band. I think I would say that is the core or the most critical factor to solve first.
Your first prototype, at least the first ones that you showed to, actually forget the first media rides.
Right.
Your first prototypes, you were using a pre-existing frame where, no?
Never.
I believe that a lot of KTM ideas went into it.
Absolutely nothing.
So it was pure original.
I don't know where that line of thought came in from, but I think maybe we were using endurance forks or something on the proto, but absolutely nothing else was.
Even the frame was ground up new.
Yes. I'll share the...
No, fair enough. So that's the...
I don't think you've seen any of that stuff, what we'd built early 2016, 17. So there, frankly, the focus was on the powertrain.
Okay.
Getting the battery and the motor running to our benchmark performance was key. So it was a ridiculous wheelbase, 1550 wheelbase. Very, all the CG was really low, not very conducive for city riding, but we wanted to get the powertrain right.
Okay.
So first 1 year went into getting the batteries on point. This was still when we were running modular batteries.
Okay. Right? The swappable batteries.
Yes.
Okay.
So each modular battery was about 15 kgs. And over the next year, that 15 came to sub 10 kgs. And of course, the next generation of prototypes, the wheelbase got a lot more optimized. We were less than 1400. Today, we're running 1350 wheelbase. And I think the second proto to the fifth or sixth is when the riding dynamics and the powertrain both came together really well.
Obviously, the more challenging aspect would have been the powertrain rather than the chassis, and because those that tech is available.
Yes, yes.
With the motorcycle, you were coming up with new tech, right?
Correct. Which is why we had to prioritize the unknown first and then solve the slightly better knowledge areas after that.
How big was your team when you started off?
It was 3 people. 3 people for the first, say, 6 or 8 months.
What were the 3 looking at? What were the areas of expertise, or at least their roles?
So, it was between Neeraj and me, the design side, the engineering, the electronics was sort of, we had a good understanding of what we needed to do. But of course, there are a lot of areas where we are not necessarily the experts to drive things towards production. I think that's where we were able to ascertain what are the key roles from a tech standpoint that need to augment the experience we brought in. But yeah, the first 3 people was 2 of us and 1 more person on 3D and design.
Okay.
So cumulatively, we were able to quickly prototype a bunch of things. I still remember we first got our 3D printer in 2016. A lot of plastics. It's not possible to injection mold or do SLA printing. Super expensive. So we got the filament printers and spent more time maintaining that printer than getting meaningful prints out of it. But yeah, if you zoom out and look, there was tangible progress made.
And then how did the expansion of the team happen?
So then we got prototyping became a very important skill set. Software became a very important requirement. Power electronics came into play. So that's when, these areas formed the first core 12 people in the team.
Okay.
So design, electronics, software, power electronics, prototyping.
And how big is your team now?
Today, team is about 250.
And on the manufacturing side, how many do you have?
This would include that.
Okay.
Core R&D would be about 150 folks today.
Okay. We were talking about your very first bikes. So the first bikes that were given to the media to ride at the Chennai racetrack.
Right.
In fact, you all were very brave to do your first media experience at a racetrack because at a racetrack, you are full on the...
True.
Okay, you're not full on the gas. What do you say in your EV parlance? You're full on the what? Throttle?
Throttle.
Okay. So you're full on the throttle through the experience that you have.
Sure.
What were the learnings from it?
So what the media fraternity rode in 2019 was, I think, the 7th generation of the Evolution, which is one of the 7s in F77. That's when we were sort of satisfied with some of the performance requirements. So at that phase, we were still running the 3 modular packs. But one thing that was very clear was, if it's a performance machine, we need to provide that experience in every way and form. It's not going to make sense to call it a sports motorcycle and do a city test ride with it. And second was, of course, we wanted to inspire that confidence that whatever the feedback may be for us, of course, a lot of uncertainties in terms of, we tested it on the tracks, but of course, from the experts riding it and what they have to say to us and to the whole world, there was, of course, a lot of takeaways for us. But I think one thing that got established there was the performance aspect stood out pretty well.
Okay.
The dynamics of the bikes was on point.
Okay.
Even though we did not have any liberty of taking a benchmark chassis and designing around it, we had to create everything from scratch because the batteries had to be removable at that point. The whole CG aspect was very different compared to a engine and a petrol tank. So solving for a good 50-50 weight distribution and getting that character in a tangible way or form when you ride it on a track on a straight or when you're weaving in and out of a S-bend, for instance, right? And that was really great feedback that we got from the community. And in terms of the feedback that we need to improve on, for instance, I mean, we were clear that some systems weren't up and running. The display system wasn't the final production-ready displays. The other factor at that point was there was a difference in performance between full charge and half charge of the battery. Right? And you would have faced that with multiple EVs. The next 3 years went into solving that.
When you did this first ride with the media, was it the intent that it would take 3 more years to bring it to market?
COVID happened in between, right? Intent was about 18 months, 12 to 18 months post the media rides. And we were pretty much there. And a month after that is when news of COVID started coming in, and by March 2020, we were all in a state of panic, and the whole world had come to a standstill. So I think March, April, May went into figuring out operational models of how we progress with R&D. We had sort of held off on investing on production because that would have been a really high investment going into setting up a production facility, your rents, your operations, investment in machines, all of that. So we decided to put a hold on that, and we had a Gen 2 of the F77 already planned.
Okay.
Then we thought, why not get that to the market as the first one.
Okay.
Gen 2 was higher range, higher performance, and a lot more adaptation of smarter connected tech. So that 2 years went into migrating from this battery architecture to what we have now.
Okay.
And the previous one was giving a range of 130 to 150 kilometers. Now we are at a range of IDC range of 300 plus. And a real world, we are seeing people comfortably doing 250 plus in regular usage conditions.
The styling of the motorcycle, is that your baby?
I think me plus the initial team, I would say it's 4 or 5 of us who are actively working to and fro between engineering and design.
Okay.
Because that loop was very important because there were hard points on constraints on engineering. From our perspective, the look and feel of the motorcycle, the ergonomics, the way the clay model was then developed to have the right ergonomics when you're seated, because man and machine have to be one unit, especially for a motorcycle.
True. Yeah.
So that back and forth also took considerable time for engineering to sort of adapt to the design requirements and for the design team to work around the engineering constraints.
But it was all done here in India, in Bangalore.
Everything, every single thing.
So it's not like you contracted an international design house to work on it? Nothing.
Absolutely not. India's got amazing talent. So whether it's design or engineering, we've got a great mix of 3 domains in the company. Aviation, consumer electronics and automotive. I think we're a good 33% influence from each of these. So
Narayan, I want to talk to you about the whole aviation influences. It's obvious, the styling, your marketing, it's all aviation inspired. Was that at the start itself, or was it a marketing idea that came to you while in the shower?
Okay, so it has nothing to do with marketing. I think what we communicate to the external world is a reflection of what we are at the core. Right? I mean, we mentioned that Neeraj was running a drone startup before Ultraviolette. So he's been crazy passionate about aviation in general. I was an avid aero modeler.
Okay.
And right from building line control aircrafts, where you had 2 channels connected to the aircraft. One was the elevator and one was the fuel intake, the air intake, right?
Okay.
And you had to spin around in circles, and you only can adjust the altitude of the aircraft.
Okay.
Right from building those to getting into RC aircrafts. And at some point, of course, wanted to be a fighter pilot. I also had power issues, so it didn't happen. But I think it runs very deep in both our DNA itself. And on the team, when it came to solving technical problems, there is no history of people who worked on electric vehicles for 20 years to be experts on solving thermals or architecture of electronics on electric vehicles. So this came from aviation industry. So we got folks in Ultraviolette from, say, companies like ISRO, Lockheed Martin, worked with Boeing, Airbus, multiple projects on both the structural side as well as on the electronics. So structure, for instance, the very fact that we had to create a frame from scratch, which the geometry of the frame was fundamentally, it is fundamentally very different from a conventional IC engine motorcycle frame. So creating, validating, simulating, and then building and getting that correlation as close as possible to simulation and real world performance. That was driven from a aviation approach itself.
How do you get these folks?
I mean, India's got all of these companies and that are doing R&D, not just for other Indian companies, but the who's who of the aviation world as well.
Do they come to you or do you go to them?
I mean, of course, this was something that Neeraj and I identified as what are the augmented skill sets that we sort of need to leverage to build the right validation in the tech. And yeah, we reached out to people in the start. So of course, I think the first 50, 60 people, we were the folks who interviewed over 600 people, then built the first team of over 50 or 60. I think post that is when we formally got an HR person in place, right?
So we'll talk about the motorcycle in a bit. Let's talk about as a startup founder, what do you go through? Everybody wants to create a startup. It's a cool thing, right?
Right.
But it's not easy. Okay, we
Right.
all know that. We also run a startup. What challenges did you face as a startup founder? You have to do things that you don't particularly enjoy doing also.
Sure.
And you probably do everything,
Sure.
right? From making the coffee to
Sure.
everything, right?
Sure.
What's the life of a startup founder at the start and obviously now, once
Sure.
you have a baby in hand?
Sure. So yeah, rightly, it's evolved quite a bit. From when we started, I think let's go to the motivation of why you start, right? That is super important to how you succeed as a startup founder. Here, our motivation wasn't to become entrepreneurs. It wasn't by choice, it was by consequence. So we just felt the consumer electronics industry is moving exponentially, right? From we used landlines, 15 years back?
Yeah.
Look at where we are now in
Yeah.
terms of communications, right? And if you look at the automotive industry, it's not followed the same trajectory. So our motivation was to bridge that gap. And second was, could we make India stand out from a global market standpoint for being an innovator in design and technology? So these were the two main parameters for us. And both of us, having worked in the industry and having studied in different parts of the world, felt this need or this gap here, and that's when we got back to sort of try and address it, right? And to do that, you needed to start a private limited enterprise. So it was, I mean, that's what led to forming a company. Wasn't the fact that we want to be entrepreneurs and okay, let's start a company to work on electric vehicles. So what we wanted to mobilize required us to do this.
So that's the why. Now, the whole life of a startup founder.
Right.
What's it like?
It's quite chaotic. It's quite there is always uncertainty at all points in time, right from the early days where you're figuring out my bank balance, I'm running out of money in the next 3 months. How do I now get more people to buy into the vision, to then getting the right people on board. The next challenge is motivating folks, right? And if you want the right kind of people, it's not just a knowledge fit, it's also a culture fit in today's times, right? So it's, I mean, if you look at our company, it's not people who are just performing a role. It's people who bought into that vision and share a similar passion with the extended team and with us to sort of create a difference. And to do that, they must buy into your vision to begin with. So then recruitment becomes quite creative also, right? It's not just an interview for a particular role that requires to be filled. In some cases, we've had to spend, say, 4 to 6 months on multiple weekends with people to, brainstorm, and at some point, then they get really interested and come on board, join us. So it's been solving the team part in the second phase. I think post that was getting external investors to buy into the vision, because cumulatively between Neeraj and me, we would have saved up a single digit number of lakhs, right? That is not going to go too far. But I think what we built was enough prototypes or validation of the powertrain, and we were able to pitch that. And
so at what level of development did you go and start pitching for investment?
Once we had smart batteries that was able to communicate not just with the bike, with the back-end servers. The batteries were able to detect if you're an authorized user of the vehicle, and then only the terminals go live. And batteries that cater to consistent 100 kilometers plus speeds of driving for consistently long periods of time and don't overheat, and how the thermal part was solved. And of course, all of those solutions may have been hacky, but were solved from a fundamental physics perspective. The next 5 years was now refining that to a production scale, right? So we got all of these things up and running in a very raw format, where the fundamental understanding of battery tech and powertrain was in place. And that is the point where we started talking to external investors.
Who was your first investor?
Our first investor was this person called Vishesh Rajaram. Today he's got his own fund called Speciale Invest. And we probably would have had a few hundred meetings before we got one person to believe in our vision.
You had 100 meetings to
A
get
few
your
hundred,
first.
a few hundred.
A few hundred.
Yeah,
So it's not like funding is easily available. And
absolutely not.
was that the biggest challenge?
At that point in time, for sure. At that point in time, because we were already a collective group of talented folks, so tech wasn't the challenge. Yeah, at that point in time, funding was definitely a challenge.
And was the stress levels through the roof about funding?
For Neeraj and me, yes. But of course, we also make it clear that we'll absorb all of that. The rest of the team focus on what is required from the tech perspective. And I'll tell you why this was hard, because we have all of the VCs present in India as well. But
And especially in Bangalore, where you are based?
Yes. So access to meeting people was not the problem. But if you've looked at all the startups that, say, 2010 to 2016, 17 were heavily funded, predominantly models of companies that have worked in the West, adaptations of that in India. So we haven't seen too many things that were from the scratch, building a new product for a new market for evolving technology, right? Too many variables to handle for a typical VC. And I think for them, a VC wants more validation and comfort of this is going to be a sure shot or close to a sure shot form of success. So, and I don't really buy into that every VC saying we are disruptive risk taking. Quite the contrary, depending on which entities you're speaking to. Of course, understandable if you look from a different lens and you look at too many uncertainties here. But fortunately, Vishesh was one of the maverick investors. So today he's, apart from Ultraviolette, he's invested in space technology. He's invested in a company working on vertical takeoff aircrafts.
Okay.
Invested in augmented reality, vision-based company. So he's of that bent of mind, right? And we ran into him at the right time.
So from your first investor, then scaling up and getting more investors on board, you also have TVS as one of your
Yes.
marquee investors. Was that a little easier?
So it's a different type of challenge. And with a company like TVS, they understand the segment, right? And they understand the technology that we're building. Because, of course, all companies are working on electric technology themselves as well.
Yeah.
So when we started our conversations with TVS, we had, of course, it didn't happen in one meeting. It, probably took over 6 to 8 months to get the buy-in from the party on the other side, which involved folks from the business side, folks from the technology side. And what we successfully did was go well past our milestones that were on paper, right? We would have a plan of in the next 3 months, this is the set of milestones we would achieve. Next 6 months, that's the milestone we're looking at. But I think we were constantly a little ahead of the curve when it came to the pace of development of tech.
Okay.
And at some point, I think the right folks got very interested in what we're building. And
So
that's how
obviously
we-
this is a question to ask TVS, that why would they invest in a EV startup when they themselves are doing EVs? What is your take on it? Why would they want to invest in you? And they're also doing electric scooters.
Sure.
So why two entities?
See, I think from a larger organization perspective, the larger a company grows, it comes with certain limitations in terms of how agile one can be, how risk-taking you can be. You're a private company, right? So that means that your risk-taking abilities have to be very well justified and quantified before you do it. So in some ways or forms, the ability to be super agile is very different, or a startup has that advantage. And I think they would have definitely seen that advantage with our style and pace of working as well.
Do they learn from you? Do TVS's engineers on the EV side learn from your learnings?
We've been in touch for the last 4 years from a perspective of a strategic investor, right? So of course there's a lot of interactions between Ultraviolette and TVS, but in terms of technology, we are very independent.
Okay.
So we are not involved with any of the technology that is happening at their end,
And vice versa.
yes.
So your innovations don't automatically go to TVS.
I do not want to get into too
Okay.
many of the nitty-gritties of that, but at this point, I mean, fair to say that we are quite independent.
Okay. You also have cool investors, Dulquer Salmaan being one of them. How
Right.
did that come about?
So Dulquer was an associate of Vishesh who first invested in the company. And today he's part of Vishesh's fund as well.
Okay.
And I mean, we all know he's a automobile connoisseur, right?
Yep.
And
You're not using the word petrol head.
no, like he loves anything creative.
Yep.
And though he's an actor, or I mean that is the lens through which the world sees him. He's quite a cool designer behind the scenes.
Okay.
And he's got a lot of cool ideas, you know, of how he perceives the brand, of the emotional connect with the products, and so that is not just limited to being a petrol or a IC enthusiast. I think it's to do with any cool form of technology. And so he was super kicked when he heard our plans. Of course, what we had when we met him was a bare skeleton and a battery inside it. But from a design perspective, we could showcase what we are envisioning as creating by 2020. And
now the journey and the stage that you are at today, you obviously will still need more funding, right? Is it now easier because you have a physical product that people are experiencing, you have got media reviews out?
So, I mean, at some point, we are looking at building a company that is also self-sufficient. Both Neeraj and I are driving the objectives towards that. In terms of how easy or not it is to get funding, I mean, there's no straight answer to it. What we are confident about is the fact that we haven't taken any shortcuts. We've built a very solid base, and we are clear we are in it for the long run. We are not looking at it as an opportunistic endeavor, right?
As an opportunity to exit.
Yes, absolutely not. We love what we're doing. I just wish I could spend more time on designing products than, like you said, doing everything else in the company as well. But yeah, no complaints there. But we are confident of what we've done, how we've done it in a very robust and fundamental aspect to building tech. And that should help us in, anything to do with the business front as well.
Ather preceded you by a couple of years. They were among the first in this space.
Right.
And obviously they went through a lot of learnings. Did that give you confidence plus learnings and do's and don'ts?
I think what we saw from companies that launched before Ather was one of them, was the education of electric, I think was at a fairly mature stage across the country. And it wasn't a question of is it going to be electric. For certain segments, it was definitely EVs having the upper hand when it comes to the connected technology, cost per kilometer. All of this comes into play, and that learning started coming in a very strong way for the typical consumer. So I think that was quite interesting for us to look at and learn from as well. And of course, when it comes to segments, it's a totally different mindset when it comes to scooters versus motorcycles.
Obviously. Do you interact with Tarun often in your EV startup world? Do you interact with other CEOs, co-founders?
I mean,
do you have like a WhatsApp group?
I'm sure all of us would wish we had more time to interact, but we're operationally very drowned to, neck deep to take too much time out to.
Do you all have like a secret WhatsApp group?
I mean, if it is secret, then.
Okay.
Folks are, we are all in touch, but I would say each of us is super busy with what's going
on. That's on setting the company up. Let's talk about launching the motorcycle.
Sure.
Now, that is marketing, right?
Sure.
Tesla is where it is today also because of the story around it. It's the iPhone of the automotive world.
Sure.
Today, you don't need an iPhone, right? But you want an iPhone. It's the same with Tesla. And it would be the same with your motorcycles as well.
Right.
How do you make this product cool?
The biggest advantage we have, I'd say, is everything that we market is very honest to what we believe in ourselves. So, till date and moving forward as well, I'm pretty sure there is not going to be any manufactured storyline out there. We want to be that one company that has a bold vision for the future, and we want to go about it in our way. And of course, being very logical to manage the different stakeholders in the loop. The biggest stakeholder being the customer or the consumer here. So we want to continue to create differentiated experiences. I wouldn't use the word product because with today's technology, it is no more about going from A to B. It's the whole experience around, right from how you perceive your vehicle to how somebody else perceives you on the vehicle to how the ownership experience is.
So how do you grow that whole ownership experience? How do you make it different from KTM? Because that would be like the obvious rival. You're charging a slight premium over it because yours is new technology. How do you create a differentiated experience for your customer?
So differentiated experience comes from how connected are you with our customer, right? I think that is the next step for us to now actively prioritize. Often when it comes to the automobile world, the experience is really good till you make that purchase. And after that, it starts to taper off. You would have seen that if it's a 1 lakh bike or a 20 lakh bike, we all have the same sort of sentiment towards it. Right? So how can post-sales be more proactive rather than reactive is what we are trying to solve now.
So do you have like any benchmarks for it? To me, a benchmark for customer at least experiences would be Royal Enfield with what they do with rides.
Right.
That community that they have built around it. Do you have like any examples that you say, okay, this is a best practice that you should implement?
I mean, that is a good example. We also are building a very strong community and we are very much in touch with our customers and we are seeing a lot of sub-communities also forming. The plan now is to have more and more differentiated experiences, rides, boot camps on knowing your F77, not just F77, understanding electric vehicles in general. So all of that is now coming up in the next 12 months in a structured form. Talking about rides and community, I think today is a good time to talk about it. One of our riders from Chennai, customers from Chennai, his name is Bala. He took off from Chennai 10 days back, reached Leh today.
Oh, really?
I got an update driving here to the studio that he just reached Leh.
Okay.
And it's been, I mean, I'm in touch with him. So it's not a company sponsored activity. He wanted to do a ride and be the first guy to take the F77 to Leh. And it's been a remarkable journey. And
10-day journey.
10-day journey. And what we did was, a couple of days before he left, he came over to Bangalore. We did a crash course on, understanding your vehicle so that if anything was to happen, he knows what to fix, how to go about it. But yeah, it's been a remarkable journey. He's been charging at some army bases that our team was able to connect him with, post Simla, and the whole ride from here across, I think, across Rajasthan at 40-45 degrees to now he's at -10, -15 degrees riding in Leh. And so it's, I mean, not just me, our whole company, all 250 people are following his journey and super kicked
Very
by
cool.
it.
So that's a good segue into our next topic, which is infra.
Right.
Is that the biggest problem, or is it that the problem that everybody makes it out to be?
And there's truth to both. I'd say it's not such a big problem, but it definitely is something to consider. I'd say with the kind of range that we provide, riding in a city or going to a neighboring city or within the same state is not an issue. I mean, we're doing about IDC range is 300, real world is about 240, 250. And we're seeing a lot of our people do that. And of course, similar to an IC engine vehicle, if you continue to rev the bike or you constantly do 150 kilometers per hour on highway, of course your mileage drops. It's no different from that perspective. But with the range we are providing, we are able to now solve all of your city to close nearby intercity.
So you can do Bangalore to Nandi Hills, go up and down twice and back.
Easily. I did a ride from Pune to Kolhapur a couple of months back, 200 plus kilometers. So, and Bangalore, Mysore. We've had a lot of folks in the first batch of deliveries came to the hangar in Bangalore, registered the bike in Karnataka, but they were living in Chennai.
Okay.
So like, okay, so delivery is done. So where are you headed to now? And he's like, Chennai. So of course the folks who went to Chennai had to take a 1 hour break, charge in between.
But now the charging infrastructure is coming up and quite rapidly. We did this drive with the Nexon EV Max from Kashmir to Kanyakumari.
Right.
And there is charging everywhere, particularly in the south. It's
Right.
more or less sorted.
Right.
All the areas that you would generally stop over for a cup of coffee has
Right.
a charging point.
True.
So I don't think it's such a big problem, but
And we've simplified it even further, right? With both our chargers, the standard or the boost, all you need is a 15 amp socket. You don't need a physical charger to be present there to charge your vehicles. So we've got offloaded all the tech onto the charger or the vehicle. All you need is a 15 amp socket. So even when you buy a bike today, you take it home, you don't need us to come and install a specific charger for you. So that we've sort of solved that from multiple points of view, simplified the experience of onboarding energy. But we've come across a few instances where, on multiple of these apps where you locate charging points.
Yeah.
Until you get there, you don't know if that charging point is still working or
True.
not, or if power supply is there.
True.
So I think that feedback loop is critical, and all companies are aware of it. We ourselves are aware of it. We are also starting to focus on what we can do on the charging infra. It can't be a purely ultraviolet-led approach, but we definitely want to contribute towards that, identifying a lot of the routes that our community is taking and facilitate UV charging along those paths. And then, of course, the whole collective industry is coming together. I think the next couple of years, this should be addressed.
Earlier, we were talking about different technologies available for a customer. There is petrol, there is hybrid, there is EV. What's your take on it? There are people in your space that say that end ICE now. Are you on the same bandwagon?
I think we're looking at a fair period of coexistence of multiple forms of technology. And like we discussed, I've grown up loving motorcycles of all forms, right? And so for me, it's more of a transition or a different form of technology in the near future. And each one has its own merits. You could argue different perspectives endlessly, but there are definite value adds to electric vehicles you can't ignore. Of course, you'll have a lot of pointers on IC engines as well. But for a fair spectrum of use cases and scenarios, electric has a lot of benefits. And I don't think it's going to be a case where 2025, 26, we won't see IC engines anymore. We're looking at a decade of multiple forms of tech being there, right? And yeah, so that's where I stand on this. It's more of Ultraviolette is producing vehicles that have an amazing ride experience, ownership experience. It happens to be electric.
Your brand showcase, your showroom in Bangalore, do you call it a showroom or what do you call it?
It's called the Hangar.
Okay, the Hangar. Now, that is clearly Hangar inspired. It's clearly Aviation inspired. Right. Who designed that? Who came up with the whole idea?
So, all of that is our design team. So, of course, we've got a very, very skilled design team, and now we've got a lot of folks on the marketing side as well, all in-house. So, all of that inspiration, all of that reflection of the core DNA of Ultraviolette, everything that went into designing the F77, how do we, in a very abstract form, showcase that same DNA in the experience of the space itself? And how do you provide a very immersive experience at the same time? And the design team went overboard. They designed a flight simulator. So we've got an entire pilot and a co-pilot cockpit set up in a hangar where you can run multiple flight simulator programs on the screen in front of you, and with the whole control of all the elements of an aircraft as well. So this, I think 3 people from our team spent 2 months, designed it from scratch, got it fabricated, and now it's one of a kind, right?
Yeah. Is this something that you're going to roll out across the country? That's one question. The second is, do you actually still need physical dealerships?
I think we do. We do need physical dealerships. We need service first and foremost. Service is very important in a city before you start deliveries. Dealership, I think, is something you can take a little more time to sort of establish, but pretty crucial because you're talking about aspirational product. You're talking about a new form of technology, and you still need that touch and feel experience. You still need the test ride. And I have seen firsthand numerous people who are very skeptical about electric vehicles. And I end my conversation there. I say, here's the key. Please go on a test ride. And then they come back and be like, man, I did not think an electric vehicle could do this, right? So, of course, the ballistic mode is a cherry on the top. It's maybe a little dangerous for the city, but it's people have amazing fun, and also the fact that you can change modes on the fly. It's a single tap mode change, and it's a very interactive ride experience.
Fair warning, I haven't ridden the motorcycle. I'm still waiting for you all to get some bikes to Pune so that we can ride it. But I hear a lot of good things. My colleagues have obviously ridden it and they have a lot of good things to say about it. There are pros and cons, obviously, but that's with every motorcycle. With an ICE also, there are pros and cons. So that's fair enough. What I'm particularly kicked about is your plan to go racing.
Right.
You're one of the first to actually do that.
Right.
And racing is, to me, the most intense laboratory that you could have, because anything that could fail will fail over there.
Sure.
And also as a space to really train your engineers to come up with solutions on the fly and on the ground. There's nothing like it. Honda, they came from racing. All their R&D was done at racing tracks, and that's why they are where they are today. What is the whole thought process of going racing?
I mean, you sort of articulated it really well,
much,
right? You covered most of the points. So very much on the same page there. The idea is to form a lab where there's an independent team that is handling a lot of the pushing the boundaries kind of an approach towards tech, powertrains, different applications of aerodynamics, different versions of different form factors of motorcycles. We gave a glimpse of this at the Delhi Auto Expo with the F99 platform, which is actively under development as we speak. So we're pushing the performance limits, we're pushing the speed limits, we're pushing sustaining of that sort of requirements from the battery for a longer period of time, sustaining the issues that could come up with thermals when you're on a racetrack constantly from say fully charged to a zero charged state. So that is the intent, where hopefully over time a lot of those innovations, or at least a few to begin with, can come into production. And
F77 to F99, how different is it?
It's an entirely different battery architecture.
Completely different
battery architecture.
Okay.
I mean, that's how the power output is double at the moment. We're talking about speeds north of 200 kilometers per hour. And how do you sustain that kind of performance for longer durations? So all of that is what is being developed.
And how long before that becomes production reality?
So we currently do not have plans to get that into production. The point is can we get a racing league up and running, or can we get into the world of racing with that platform? And then I think it's a little too soon to talk about which segment we want to get into next through Ultraviolette. So we are giving ourselves a little more time to evaluate the global markets, evaluate the reception to what we're building, and then take that call.
Are you testing the waters globally?
Yeah, so I mean, that is one of the reasons we have a few global investors who got excited and came on board recently. XOR Capital was one of them. Qualcomm Ventures was one of them as well. And for them,
XOR is Fiat's holding company.
Yes.
Right.
Ferraris and Fiat.
Yes.
So they really like people that have a 0 or 1 approach, where it's a go big or go home kind of a mindset altogether. And for them, what is interesting is the fact that we're building all of this tech in India from imagine, design and build. All 3 steps are being done in India. And probably for the first time, a technology in this segment could become a global name, right? And which again comes back to one of the motivations for starting Ultraviolette. When we think performance motorcycles, we always look to the east or the west. Italy, Germany, Japan, right? That is your spectrum of...
True.
India doesn't figure in that thought process.
Yeah.
Could we change that? Sony is a good example of a company that did that for Japan, right?
Yes.
So Sony, through the 20, 30 years or so, transitioned what making in Japan stood for. So I think we see ourselves at that precipice here. And
who are your inspirations, or what are your inspirations?
Our inspirations are, frankly, people, companies that have taken bold decisions to make a difference, which is like an all or nothing kind of an approach, not an incremental approach. There are a dime a dozen people doing incremental progress on tech. Of course, we need that. We need that for the world to sustain. But we believe our collective strength as a group of people is folks who can pull off a bigger leap when it comes to advancements in tech and designs.
Can you give me some examples of people or companies that inspire you?
The iPod story is a great example. Every other company was trying to maximize the number of songs you can store on that hard disk, right? The iPod took experience to a whole new level. And it wasn't born from a market research, right? It wasn't born from an Excel sheet that said, these are the 10 features that tomorrow's customers are looking for. Every other company said, tomorrow's customers are looking for more songs in my playlist. But the iPod experience changed the music industry altogether, right? So stuff like that. Walkman did that before the iPod.
True.
And Tesla in some ways have done that with the association of electric with mobility, fundamentally.
What are the challenges that you face right now? Do you have governmental challenges? Do you have regulatory challenges?
So in terms of challenges for us, I think first and foremost is more operational. Of now we are present in Bangalore plus 4 other cities. Now scaling up but maintaining the same quality of service and experience is what we are actively focusing on. In terms of things like policies and subsidies, we were clear as a company, when you want to form a business case for a long-lasting enterprise, we can't be too reliant on a transient policy phase, right? So which is what we're seeing now. Subsidies came down. Everything has gone up 30,000 in that segment, and which is 15-20% of the cost of the vehicle, which is crazy, right? So we were pretty clear from a business planning perspective that, a different matter that we don't qualify for that
FAME subsidies
because we are over the 1.5 lakh ex-factory cost. But we were aware of that and planned our tech accordingly.
What is your local percentage in your motorcycle right now?
I think except the cells, everything else is local.
So in terms of value, what percentage is?
I would say over 90% of the number of parts that go into the motorcycle are all local.
In terms of cells, now that is the big challenge that our country faces, that we don't make battery cells in India.
Right.
And setting up a battery manufacturing facility is frightfully expensive.
Correct.
Do you see progress on that front?
For sure. I think there have been a few attempts that are already been underway for the last 5 years in India. Not only that, I think the global manufacturers also recognize India as a big market and are also evaluating setting up their units in India for manufacturing of cells. So that should get streamlined in the next 5 years or so.
The news that lithium reserves have been found in Kashmir.
Absolutely.
Is that something that excites you? Do you see some...
Of course. Being a little circumspect right now, we want to see how that plan is being mobilized. That would... And in time, as we grow, if we could play a role in influencing how that plan is mobilized, would be the ideal situation.
Awesome. And last question. What's next for Ultraviolette?
Okay, what's next is going global. I think what will continue over the next 12 months is scaling across India. And the next big challenge for us is taking this technology to Europe, Latin America, US, and a couple of other markets. And we've seen a lot of organic interest come in. We've seen interest over email and pre-bookings and all of that coming in from 190 countries. Now, that is absolutely crazy, right? And this is without any marketing, which means that people are talking about it, circulating the articles or videos on their own social circles. So we see, for instance, if Frankfurt we see 2 orders coming in from Frankfurt. In the next 1 week, we would see that 2 growing into 20. Which also suggests that it is purely organic. So we know the demand is there. We know the resonance with the product is there, from the design of the vehicle to what the performance is to. And of course, there would have to be some amount of fine tuning for different markets to comply with the regulatory requirements and user requirements as well, which we are actively working towards. But that is, I think, our next big challenge to solve.
And one more last question, because I must ask you this. yours is a very cool story. How does somebody get involved in your story? What are the different careers out there at Ultraviolette?
I think we are open. Even our recruitment has been very organic. It's seldom been a fixed job description we are actively looking to fill. It's been a lot more organic because in this sort of a system, you need to be an expert in one or two fields, but you also need to be a generalist in 4 or 5 other fields alongside that expertise, because there is too much cross collaboration. So there is no approach of my idea is the best idea. It's a more collaborative approach where multiple talent, like a battery pack for instance, required mechanical engineering, required aerodynamics, required thermals, required electronics, required chemical engineering, all of this to come in, and then of course production and manufacturing as the loop on top to now get the feasibility in place to make the battery pack, right? So we look for people that are open-minded, collaborative with 1 or 2 very core areas of expertise.
And if somebody were to do follow in your footsteps,
Sure.
what are the dangers they should watch out for? What can you give aspiring startup founders? What lessons can you give them that don't make this mistake?
There are a lot of challenges. In terms of mistakes, I think it's important to be a little fluid with your ideas. You might have an amazing plan on day one. 5 years down the line, if you're still on the same plan, you've sort of missed the bus, right? Like a very relevant example would be our decision to change the battery tech altogether, right? It was a mammoth challenge for us. 5 years of work had gone into that battery technology. And for us to spend another 24, 30 months revamping that or migrating not only the cells from 18650 to 2170, but the whole new architecture change itself. And not only us having that conviction, passing on that conviction, making sure everyone understands why that is important. And for a company, imagine that is the core of what you're building. And to have such a fundamental shift 5 years into the development process required a lot of conviction, right? And that also comes with being open-minded to how the market is responding, not just to what you're doing, to the other segments out there as well. And of course, feedback coming in from our testing team, from the external world, and from your community. So that helps. Having that outside world perspective to how things are evolving is very important, especially if the journey is a longer one.
All right, Narayan.
Cool.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
And I hope this inspires more young engineering students to think of a career in different forms of mobility, and also teaches them a few lessons. And your story, to me at least, it's really cool because it is organic and it comes from an enthusiast space. Right. You are one of us.
Right.
You ride petrol motorcycles. You are a visionary in electric motorcycles. It just fits in with what we talk about. And I wish you all the best.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, I look forward to riding a motorcycle
soon. We'll make it happen soon.
All right. All the best, man.
Cool. Thanks.